On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Trevor Lee. He's co-founder and CEO at Myko. We're going to be talking about breaking into the tech field. And actually, we're going to go through a little bit of, Trevor's background. He actually worked at a pretty large company. He'll kind of tell us a little bit about that decision to get an MBA, decision to become a founder, and kind of that process of trying to find the right product, finding product market fit. A lot of those things that everyone always is interested in hearing about somebody's journey. Trevor, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me. So I appreciate the introduction. My name is Trevor, co-founder, CEO here at Myko, and we're building a voice interface for people to interact with their legacy data systems. And it's taken us quite some twists and turns to get there and ultimately move from the finance industry where I was and when I started working when I graduated from undergrad into where I am now, founder of a tech company. So it's been fun journey.
Awesome. We're going to dive into a bunch of that as well. And you mentioned you worked for, obviously somebody can look you up, where you work. You worked at Fitch early in your career. Seems like a great place to be. Great name brand, pretty comfortable career path, lots of options, all those good things you get from those type of companies. I guess if you were to take us back to the decision to actually leave that role, and I'm going to kind of jump from a previous history to that point in time, because obviously that became an important factor in you becoming a co-founder at some point, starting a company. What reason did you have, or what was the motivation of wanting to leave a corporate job that seemed pretty good?
I think pretty quickly I realized I didn't like working for other people. And so early on in my time there, I kind of frequently was looking around. It was like, why are we doing things like this? Like, why don't we just do it this way? Why don't we just do this way? And then people would come up with a list of 17 reasons why it's always been done that way. And you can't change these systems and you can't do this thing. And it just drove me nuts. And so I realized I wanted to be in kind of work in finance for a long time and ultimately move on to the buy side, an investing role. I read all the investing books and spent my free time kind of doing that. And then ultimately, I kind of, as I just started learning more, got the creative itch and wanted to really build something and have the opportunity to start things. As I kind of started a few charities on the side and other things, just getting that creative motion going was really interesting for me. And so I think by the time I was getting towards the end of my tenure at Fitch, I'd been pretty clear that I knew I wanted to found something and get into the tech industry. And so the question became, what's the best path forward to get there?
So I guess in between where you're at now, you decided to get an MBA as a part of that desire to want to leave the corporate job, be your own boss. I guess how did you see the MBA factoring into being a co-founder or starting your own business at some point?
I think people on tech Twitter would roast this take, but being in the finance industry, I didn't have a clear understanding of what being in tech really even meant. The only types of roles I understood were either you're an analyst or you're like back office. And so I didn't fully appreciate the difference even between like strategy roles, sales roles, product management roles, other than, what I read from certain blogs and trying to figure it out from the outside. And so I very much viewed it as a way to get the opportunity to intern and work and learn for a couple different places to really find out what would be a good fit coming out of it.
Yeah, and obviously you've been in different roles, right? And I think a lot of times you mentioned, how people would appreciate that take. I think it's kind of difficult because when you are in the technology field, that world is open to you. You see those opportunities. You can move into it. You understand the mechanisms. When you're not, and you're trying to make that pivot into it, obviously there's a baseline. Did you think that a technology founder role would be the inevitable path, the end path? Because obviously you could have started a lot of different businesses, right? They didn't have to be technical or technology based. Like, was the driver to move into tech because what was that aspiration of focusing on tech instead of maybe other lines of business?
One way I think about it is I've always been kind of focused on when it comes to investing or even having an understanding of software. And so a lot just kept coming back to software, the different software companies that study, I'd look at, I'd research. And a lot of my interest, like not necessarily in the e-commerce field or retail or other things. And so it's kind of a natural path of everything that I thought about that I wanted to build. It's like, well, shit, like need some technology to build that.
I guess if you're, we are kind of looking back. So as you are looking back and you decide to become a founder, that the thought of what you want to start, I mean, it's one thing to say, I want to be a founder. And I think that's a great aspirational goal. And then the other component is to know what to build so that you can be a successful founder. I guess when you're going through the MBA program, obviously you had some roles between then and starting the company. Where did the idea for Myko come about? Is it give us a little sense of when that spark happened? Was it early into the MBA program? Was it later? When did you see this idea?
After the first semester at Columbia, I took a class, The Lean Launchpad by Steve Blank. And the whole thesis of the class was like, it's a week-long sprint of you do customer discovery. You come in with an idea you think you have to cold call people every single day. You go out and just talk to as many people and kind of verify the problem, verify what you're looking on. And that really sparked the interest to try and figure out what that idea was. So I didn't necessarily have the idea. I had a couple things in the back of my head that were kind of related to what I did in my finance role of like, hey, like that's kind of a problem. Like, what if you tried to start another rating agency? Or what ultimately Myko became started as a financial modeling product. So a better way that you could build and integrate financial models. But my time in business school, I probably evaluated 10 to 15 different startup ideas over the course of 2 years, where I'd go through a month-long period of just reaching out and asking as many different experts and people questions about problems and a certain area that I was interested in to try and figure out, is this something that's worth going after?
I actually released an episode yesterday about pivoting as a CEO of a tech company. I love this topic because I think a lot of times we hear about the successes of startups and people just assume that's the business. And I think it's kind of hard because that's what gets celebrated. When you talk to founders, they're very actively looking to find where that opportunity is. And we can call it product market fit. We can call it whatever we want. I think you have to be able to identify solving the right problem and obviously establish that product market fit. When you mentioned that you first started the company and you were trying to leverage a little bit of what you did at Fitch, you had a whole different maybe vision of where the company would go. Talk to us a little bit about, obviously it seems like a great idea. You have a background Fitch, maybe even an agent, another credit rating agency, but working and integrating to financial models, again, seems like it ties really well back into Fitch. What was the kind of light bulb that went off that you decided, hey, I need to maybe move in this other direction, even though I have gone down a bit of this other direction?
Well, I think where we are with Myko was effectively, we built an initial product for the financial modeling side. We had been in market for almost a year and a half at that point. And we were struggling. I mean, we were growing slowly, but there was certainly no pull factor from the market. And it was always kind of tough sledding, right? Like you're pushing uphill. And so we continued just refining and doing effectively customer discovery. And it wasn't really until the summer of 2022 when OpenAI released the DALL-E models that we saw the power that you could have by using natural language and create these crazy images that you could have never previously conceived of in seconds. And that was a just huge light bulb for us of being like, this is where the future is going. Like humans are going to interact with software through language in some mechanism. So now, once again, how do we go back to the drawing board and kind of figure out what the right mechanism for that is? So because we had a financial modeling product, we built our own language model at the time to put into financial data. So you'd be like, what was my revenue for the last 3 months? And it wasn't until we kind of quickly shipped and released something, we learned pretty quickly we still had not found product market fit from users. And so it's just a very, very iterative journey of talk to people. You think you have a problem, put something in their hands to see if it's real enough. If yes, great. If no, keep talking to them. See what else, what other problems they have or what other angles there are.
If you were to think about your team, right? So obviously they're there, they're building the product, they're making headway. You guys had been a year in. When you go to the team and like, well, guys, I actually think the better opportunity lies here. They have to trust you. They have to feel confidence that that this isn't going to be a pivot into the wrong direction. I'm always fascinated about that. But how did that look for you and the team? Because obviously, got to have that backing. Otherwise, if they're kind of questioning or wondering why, how did that conversation unfold for you?
It's a little bit easier when you're as small as we were. So it was only three of us at the time, my co-founder, and then we had one engineer on the team as well, who's been kind of with us from the beginning, building this thing out. And we were all kind of constantly iterating and talking together about different options and ways we could make this better or kind of really find that product market fit. And so fortunately for us, it was a very consensus process where we ultimately all kind of aligned on the direction we thought we needed to go and what we had to do to get there.
I guess if you're ever going to make a pivot, being smaller certainly will help. And obviously, if you guys were talking and chatting, and you have a core member, that makes it even better. Are you at a point in which you're pretty confident in the business, or are you by nature always looking to see, is there a tweak or modification to the business model or the product that takes you in a different direction? Is that something that comes up, or is it execution time?
We're always looking for a way to increase the growth rate, increase the customers we're talking to, increase the size of the deals that we're working on. You always have to be focused on how do you grow and how do you grow faster. So I wouldn't say that we're necessarily complacent with where we are, but I think with this recent series of pivots and the current product, we feel as though we're in a much better place, and we're starting to get into conversations where it's very clear that there's an immediate pain that the product is solving that is really useful for those people that we're selling it to. And so the question now is, as we start scaling it, how do we reach as many of those people as quickly as possible?
I guess as you're kind of maybe on the investor side, when you guys made the pivot at that point, had you taken on any funding? Were you bootstrapped? What was the financial situation at that point?
No, we were still bootstrapped at that point, which definitely made it a lot easier. I think we have still pivoted since taking investment from kind of a focus on pulling data out of systems using language to kind of pushing and interacting data. And that was still a relatively larger pivot that we did here a couple months ago. And a lot of it is just communication and expectation settings around what's the reasoning behind this, how we came to the conclusion, and then what kind of gives us that comfort that we think that this is kind of the right place that we're going after. And so, this many months later, it's looking like it's going to work out and that we've made that right decision, but it's not immediate, right? You're not going to know on day one necessarily as you start going in that new direction.
I guess you mentioned, being bootstrapped. Was that a conscious decision? Was it a reflection of the business model you originally had intended was maybe something you could bootstrap? What was the decision to actually try to bootstrap it versus go get funding sooner?
I think it was just a forcing function of I tried to get funding and couldn't break in. As somebody who really didn't have any Silicon Valley network, I didn't fully understand even how the fundraising process worked outside of an MBA course here or there and talking to a couple of VCs. So tried it, was unsuccessful, got turned down from almost every VC in Silicon Valley, the original idea. And we just kept building. We didn't let it stop it.
I like that. I guess as you're kind of now further along, you have a business that's been several years. Tell us a little bit about the change in terms of your focus. And I guess from the standpoint of, you have a product that's working, you've been in business for several years now, and obviously in that case, you're trying to establish different momentums and different opportunities, focusing a little bit more on the sales side. You wanted to break into the tech field. Are you finding yourself in different roles than you probably envisioned when you first started a company, or is it pretty much what you'd hoped for when you're trying to move into the tech field altogether?
You don't truly appreciate how much chewing glass being a founder is and the level of unsexy, terrible work you have to do all the time. But with that said, I think it pretty closely matches what I was expecting. I mean, I had pretty low expectations of what you knew the day-to-day would be like. I would say I find myself probably doing a little bit more direct sales now than I envisioned, where my job at kind of where we are is really about just how do we get more customers and how do we make those customers really happy and bring them on and make sure that everything works for them, and a little bit less on kind of the product and other places right now. And so that's maybe something that was a little bit unexpected if you had told me this 4 or 5 years ago, but definitely enjoying it and recognize what I was signing up for.
I guess if you had to go back now and restart everything, because obviously, a lot of times founders do come from a tech space. So you did not. So you have a slightly different approach to becoming a founder now. If you had to go back to that transition period as you decide to make this leap to actually where you're now, are there things that you would have tried to have learned differently, or are there things that you would apply differently from what you've learned in the last 5 years of moving into the tech space as a co-founder and CEO?
I go back and forth between I did a Udacity web development course to learn some programming and get some understanding of how all the different components work and building things. I would have done kind of a full, deeper bootcamp program, I think, and really taught myself from the ground up to build things. I think that would have been very helpful and something I kind of, now with AI, everything's so easy that, it's not as much of an issue now, but especially in the early days of building this, it was somewhat of an issue. And the other thing I go back and forth on then is sales. Also, if I had taken a sales role, whether it's an AE or SDR, junior level role at some point, just that forcing function of the really direct sales training ground, I think would have been potentially something that would have been helpful.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, as you kind of talked to us about the journey, the decisions, obviously pivoting until you've found the right product market fit. And obviously this journey into the tech space is multiple factors. It's already hard enough, I think, to actually launch a company and get to the 5-year point, let alone come in and have to ramp up on some of those things. For you personally, I guess, have you, I know a lot of founders do have coaches, they find mentors. I mean, is that something that, as you mentioned, being from the outside looking in, was that something that you tried to do? Has it worked out for you? Have you found someone that you trust that you can turn to, or how do you bounce ideas off when it comes to the things that you quite aren't there yet on?
A lot of our investors have been tremendously helpful. So working with Vinod at Khosla, a number of other smaller angels have also been tremendously helpful. And ultimately just finding and connecting with people in the Silicon Valley world who are kind of taking that mentorship role. So pretty early on, I started reaching out to people who are a couple stages ahead and formed those relationships and found that to be very helpful, just getting a better lay of the land of how to understand how things work.
Absolutely. So final question, because I'm curious, because this has actually come up a couple times with a couple of CEOs, and I haven't asked, but it's been on my mind to understand. So you mentioned, obviously, you're not from the Silicon Valley area. Per LinkedIn, it shows you were in Miami. I don't know if you still are, but I guess, where are you based out of?
Yeah, a little bit north. I'm in Palm Beach Gardens. Okay.
When it comes to, obviously, if you were in Silicon Valley, maybe there'd be different components to this, but being in the Miami, South Florida area, how has that altered things for you? And I guess the reason I'm asking is I spoke to a guy who's in Kansas doing this. I spoke to somebody else who is, I think, founded a company out of Dallas. And I'm speaking to more founders who are now located outside of key tech hubs, and it's working. Obviously, there's different mechanisms behind the scenes, but I'm just kind of curious from what you see, maybe other peers you talk to. I mean, how has that changed, or does it help you? Does it hurt you? What are you seeing from being located away from, let's say, a major tech hub? And I don't want to, hey, nobody out there, I'm not saying Miami is or is not, but traditionally it's not considered a tech hub, but just kind of curious.
Given how distributed, I think, and people got comfortable with a lot of the more distributed type work events and how connected the world is, I don't think that the impact is as large as it used to be. So I still have access, and being backed by Khosla obviously helps, but to the Silicon Valley ecosystem when we're fundraising or when we're looking for customers, we're more or less part of that network. Whereas 10 years ago, it's much harder to go outside of your network just due to physical geolocation challenges. And so I don't think it makes as much of a difference. And then the other big thing is, like, the tech hub you're in does make a difference. So we've had a lot of success, for example, working with Miami-based companies. Since they're down here, they're local, you're able to do those meetings in person pretty easily. And so to some extent, that does help or hurt given the location that you're in.
Final question. I lied. And I guess this has been the question that then comes up for me. As you start scaling, and if you were to put on your co-founder hat and think another 5 years out and you're 250, 300, 500 people, whatever that size is, do you envision staying fully remote? Because obviously smaller teams, as we mentioned, you pivoted easier with a smaller team remote has some simpler components to it. Bigger team gets a little bit more challenging. There are benefits, but what do you envision? Not that anyone's going to hold you to this, but I'm just curious, like, do you foresee you continuing? Because I know the trend is people do want to go back to the office. What do you foresee happening for your growth and where you see the sitting?
There's probably a scenario where we're some version of hybrid, where we have co-located hubs that people can go in and makes it easier to kind of meet and network and work in person with people while still being like a distributed company, so that ultimately you can kind of get the best of both worlds while not being you've got to be in the office 5 days a week.
I like it. I'm not sure where that's going to go, and we certainly won't hold that to you. But I do find it interesting that more startups believe that the model you're talking about is their future, and I actually think it's a competitive advantage for them as well. But obviously, we will see how things pan out in the next couple of years and how that shifts as the market shifts. Definitely thank you for coming on. I know you shared quite a bit with us, kind of gone through your story, great examples of and stories of how you've gone through this. If somebody's going to want to connect with you to kind of pick your brain and ask you a question, maybe if they're in a similar position you were in a couple of years ago, what's a good way of connecting with you?
Find me on LinkedIn. I'm posting pretty frequently on there. If you shoot me a request or a message on there, that's probably the easiest place. I'm pretty on top of my inbox.
Okay, I love it. We'll go ahead and link to that handle for you. And again, Trevor, thanks for being on. Thanks for taking the time to share.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a great conversation.
Absolutely. All right, that's it for this episode. Be back again, different guest, different topic. Until then, 2 things. 1, I'd love for you guys to share this episode out with others, or if you know someone that might be interested in becoming a founder in the tech space and doesn't have a backing or background in tech. I think Trevor has talked about how he made that jump. He gave us some great insights in terms of what it's taken for him and how he's kind of gone through and tried to find product market fit. And also, if you have a question for him, please reach out to him, ask him. He sounds like he's a pretty open guy to passing on what he knows about the process. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Please leave me a review. Let me know how the show's going for you. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.